Fantasy football, you dealing with the best. Keep it hype, authentic, this ain't nothing like the rest. With the Armchair Fantasy Show podcast, give advice for all the listeners to improve your stats. Yeah, we live on goingfor2.com. Tuesdays and Fridays, this is what you want. Talking dynasties and daily drafts, and we just getting started, that ain't even the half. Yeah, so go ahead, tell your friends to join. Going for two, cause no one remembers the extra point. Hey, goingfor2.com, the Armchair Fantasy Show.
How you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good. I was just telling you before the show, I went out and did a little gambling last night, so ready to roll that into the weekend. I did okay last week. Not great, not terrible. How about you?
I did all right, man. I did all right.
Yep, that's about what happened to me. I lost a little bit, but it was close enough that I consider it, all in the game.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Now, Kyle, I see you on Facebook there. You're saying we got no sound. Do we got sound? Tim, so give me a little quick rundown of last week, man. Who hurt you? Who killed you? And just tell me what kind of guys did well for you last week.
Yeah, like you said, I think we were on a lot of the same guys. Cameron Artis-Payne hurt me. Kristen Michael hurt me. DC defenders helped me a lot. I was real big on the Houston offense, so obviously that paid off for me. But yeah, man, I think, like you said, I think that if there was a couple of bombs that, Mikhail McKay, I think is one you didn't mention. I had a good exposure to him last week, and he only ended up with like 8 points or something. And so he didn't really pay off much there. So, but yeah, I mean, that Kristen Michael, that hurt. Like, I just kept watching it and he couldn't go anywhere.
Huh, interesting. So now I'm hearing now on Facebook that y'all can't hear me. Can y'all hear me now? I have a feeling it's probably my, let me see if, Brian, can you hear me? Kyle, can y'all hear me out there? All right. Hopefully it's good to go now. It looks like my one of my channels that's just on my screen for some reason mutes me, but if I keep us on split screen, it looks like we're all right. So I'll have to research that after the show. All right, man. Let's just go ahead and we're getting a late start here, so we're just gonna go ahead and just jump right into the slate here. Kick it off here with quarterbacks, man. And we'll go to you first, man. Who were your quarterbacks this week that you like?
Yeah, big shocker. I'm going right back to him, man. Philip Walker. He's my favorite quarterback this week, and he's the highest priced guy on the slate. And I think for good reason. That run and shoot offense was everything we kind of hyped it up to be last week. He had a bunch of different receivers, so it gives you plenty of different stack options, which we'll get to later. They're at home, anticipated to be the highest total game of the week. I think it's like a 50 over-under, and I'm seeing a lot of people that are thinking it's going to break that, go even higher than that. So whenever there's a chance at a shootout, I always want the quarterback of the team that's projected to win. So, like I said, he's really expensive, but I think you got to pay up for him. Next guy on my list, returning to action this week, is going to be Landry Jones for the Dallas Renegades, 9,500. It's kind of tough to get a debut on the road, but it's in LA. It should be perfect weather, so that's always good. And, I think that a lot of the hype around Dallas was based around Landry Jones. Yep. Obviously, they kind of stuffed it up last week. And we saw last week that that LA team gave up 37 points to Philip Walker.
Yep.
So I think Landry Jones may not. I'm not saying that the Renegades are going to score 37, but I think he should be able to more than pay off his 9,500 price tag on DraftKings.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I got both those guys on my list as well. The only other one that I have is I got two more guys actually. And I'm going to butcher this guy's name, but Jordan Ta'amu, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'm sure it's Hawaiian. I'm probably saying it wrong. But, I mean, not only did this guy have a pretty good passing game last week, I think he had 108 passer rating, I think he threw 2 touchdowns, but he actually is the 3rd leading rusher right now in the XFL. Not for quarterbacks, just overall. I think he had like 77 rushing yards last week, so that obviously adds value to him right there. I think the fact that Houston is going to score some points, like you said, he'll have to kind of play catch up there and sort of stay with them, so he'll have to pass the ball a lot more. So definitely on him a little bit. And then on the cheaper end of things, Mr. Quinton Flowers, who actually had some value last week as a backup quarterback, he actually had some fancy points last week, is now supposed to get the start this week. Who's the start? Aaron Murray's the starter there, right? I believe he's already been ruled out. So I think Quinton Flowers at 7.5K, you can't beat that. I think we saw last week that Philip Walker, was high owned in cash games because he wasn't supposed to be the starter. Everyone thought Connor Cook would be the starter. So when he was named the starter, he was sort of that cheap quarterback that everybody went to on in cash games, and I think he was like, 50% owned at least in most of my cash games. So I think that could be the kind of the same thing with Quinton Flowers this week. I read that last time he played was in the NFL. He was actually mostly like a running back. He's played more as a running back than anything else. So I think Quinton Flowers is definitely a good play there for sure at 7.5. I guess that's pretty much every quarterback except for 2. When you only got 8 quarterbacks to choose from, we pretty much went over about all of them.
Well, Kyle mentioned Cardale. I just want to mention Cardale Jones real quick. This may actually end up being the best game of the weekend. Is DC and New York?
Agreed.
In terms of actual football, not necessarily in terms of fantasy. But I do think Cardale actually has a great opportunity to put up some real points here. My only real problem with him is he's 10-2. He's only 400 less than Walker.
Yep.
And I don't know in my mind if he has as much upside because I think that DC actually has a pretty good ground game as well.
I agree.
And that's the only thing that kind of worries me a little bit is I just wonder if they're going to be hampered a little bit on upside. And it's not like he's getting much of a price reduction. So
right.
That's my only kind of thing there.
Yep, I agree 100%. I think that DC, wants to run the ball a little bit more than what they did last week. They just couldn't get anything going last week. I think Jarrell Presley did have 12 carries, which was like 3rd, I think, in the league last week. But they want to run the ball and play good defense and keep it sort of efficient offense. And I think that kind of limits his upside a little bit. If he was in the sub 10K range maybe, but the fact that he's only $400 cheaper than the highest priced quarterback there is a little bit too steep for my blood. So I'm with you on that call as well. All right, let's move into the running backs now, Tim. Give me some of the guys you like for running back this week.
Well, Justin already mentioned him in the chat, and we just mentioned him a minute ago. We're going to go right to Jarrell Presley right there at the top. He was tied for carries at 12. He only had 31 yards on those 12 carries, but I think, like I said, DC is committed to running the ball. They are home favorites here against New York, and we did mention last week it's a little tougher to pass on the Guardians, so I think that they are going to commit to the running game this week. He also did have 3 targets, so there is a little bit of pass game work there as well. He only went 2 for 18 on those, but I think that at 7,000, he gives you a pretty good floor. But my general lineup construction this week, or at least most of the ones I've been looking at this far, are going to be paid down at running back. So as far as running backs go, he's really the only guy on the high end that I'm really interested in. Like De'Veon Smith had 16 carries but gets no pass game work, and he was $7,500. Like, I just don't know if I can pay that if we're going to be paying $10,000 plus for a quarterback.
Yep.
So most of the guys I'm going to be targeting are going to be cheaper guys. So we mentioned him last week. Obviously, there was a big discussion on Twitter about how he didn't even make the Renegade depth chart, and there Lance Dunbar, pride of North Texas, he's probably one of my favorite running backs this week. 4,600. He had 5 attempts last week, and as well as 6 targets. And I think we were talking before the show. He just looked better than Cameron Artis-Payne.
Yep.
He just seemed to fit better with the offense. Obviously, he's a better pass catcher. And at 4,600 on DraftKings, he gives you that salary release that you need to be able to pay up for one of these quarterbacks.
Yeah, the fact that he did what he did, not being listed as a starter and this whole injury talk coming into it. I was on Dunbar before all that talk, and honestly, all that talk kind of scared me off of him a little bit, and I got pissed when I saw him putting up fancy points right away. I'm like, damn it, I was on him too, but the news kind of killed me a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, and then one other thing, first of all, I want to give a shout-out to your guy. I believe he was your sit call last week with Darius Victor.
Yep.
In addition to having 9 carries, he was listed behind Tim Cook on the depth chart, but we said during the show last week we expected that to be more of a split, and he ended up coming out on the better side of that split. Because not only did he get 9 carries, he also got 3 targets.
Yep.
And he's still listed, in my opinion, he's still priced as if he is a backup running back at 4,100.
Yep.
So if you're going to be paying up for these high-end quarterbacks, high-end wide receivers, you got to save money somewhere. And I think Victor makes a great option at 4,100. So one other guy I do have interest in is Matt Jones. I think he's a former Redskin, if I remember correctly. He had the most carries in the league last week with 21, but he's questionable. So he's definitely somebody you're going to have to keep an eye on this week. I think he sat a day in practice.
Yep.
I think as of right now he is on track to play. But there's nobody getting 20 carries in this league. It's just not happening.
Not happening.
So at 5,900, I think that his price is cheap enough that even though he only got 1 target, he doesn't have a great upside in the pass game. If he plays, I'm going to want some exposure just because of the guaranteed touches I expect him to get.
Yep. I'm on all those guys as well. There's a couple guys that I wanted to mention. Actually, a couple that I haven't put on my sheet yet. But there's one running back that you kind of mentioned the injury, and I remembered I was on D'Angelo Henderson last week, and he actually got hurt in that game. And I believe it's James Butler is now the running back there, starting running back for the Houston Roughnecks. They do have another guy listed. I believe it's Nick Holley. He's actually a receiver. If you look at his stats, he didn't have a single carry. He caught more out of the slot. So James Butler, I think, gets to start here, and I believe even Andre Williams is probable right now, listed as a backup. So James Butler is the guy you want to own there in Houston. He had 9 carries, 30 yards. He also had a touchdown catch. So I think he's definitely in play. And then let's see, who else did I have on my list here? You mentioned Matt Jones. Obviously, if he's out, then obviously we can go with the backup there. Lance Dunbar, you've already talked about him, so I had him on my list as well. And I hate to say it, but Christine Michael could sneak into my rosters one more time here.
Oh no!
I'm not ready.
Why are you doing it to yourself?
I know. I don't know why I do it to myself, but there is some injury news there on his team as well. I can't think of the 2 backs. Keith Ford, I believe, is one of them. And there's another one too, I believe, that was on the team that was going to be injured. So it could be C. Mike's show. But you never know. Matt Jones could be in, and this is all a moot point anyway. So those are the 2 guys I was looking at, besides the ones that you already mentioned there. So I think those are my main guys. Nick Holley would be one of them as well. Like I said, for Houston, but he's more of a receiver. Listed as a running back, but he is a receiver. So Nick Holley would be my other guy that I would also pick for running back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had some initial interest in Kenneth Farrow, who's kind of on the other side there. Because he had 7 attempts and 4 targets, but he's kind of priced up in that range where I don't know if he's worth he could certainly exceed his price tag, but I think he should be a little bit cheaper. I think if I'm going to pay around there, I'd rather play Butler, assuming he ends up being the play. So I agree with you. I think those are most of the plays I'm really targeting. The only other guy I had on my list is kind of more of a tournament dart throw is going to be Trey Williams. He's coming in as the 3rd on the depth chart, and he's priced up at 5,000, but he seems to be their primary pass-catching back. And so I feel like the way that they kind of are playing things there is that they're going to, have their primary back that they bring in, and then he's going to be their pass-catching back. So he's not somebody I'm really targeting, but he's somebody I'm definitely going to keep an eye on, because I think Farrow is their primary runner, and then Trey Williams is going to be their pass catcher. So Jaquan Gardner is still involved there too, which is why I don't think I'll be heavy on any of those guys because they all have a role. But I did like his pass game usage, but some of that may have just been because they got way behind early. So,
yeah, good point.
Something to track, I think.
Good point. All right, we're ready to move on to the receivers?
Yep.
All right, go ahead and give me who you got for your receivers.
Well, I think the top guy, and he's priced as the top guy, is as much as a quarterback, is Nelson Spruce. I know you were talking about him going into last week. You said that you talked to some people who said, yeah, man, he's going to be involved. Mm-hmm. 15 targets, I'd say that's involved. I mean, that's insane. Like, I didn't really think that anybody let me take that back. He wasn't one of the guys I could have seen having a projection for 15 targets. We were talking Coates, we were talking Ross, Mikhail McKay.
Yep.
But there goes Nelson Spruce. There goes that man, right? So I'm going to go right back to him this week. And part of that is we talked about wide receiver cornerback matchups. He's got one of the best matchups on the board this week. He went 11 for 103 last week. So, gets Dallas at home. I think this is a situation where LA is going to have to throw the ball. I expect Dallas to be able to score now that they got Landry Jones back. I'm hoping last week was just kind of a fluke for that offense, because I did have a lot of expectations for them coming in. But there's nobody else on this slate that I think can approach 15 targets. So there's one other guy I actually just got mentioned in the chat I think could see double-digit targets, but he's the only guy I think is even going to get close to 15. So I think he's got to be number one for me, even if you have to pay all the way up for him.
Agreed. I think, like you mentioned, pay down at running back, pay up at receiver, pay up at quarterback is the way to probably play it this week. And I'm also on Nelson Spruce as well. Another guy I got on my list, and I'm going to probably butcher his name too. I think it's D. Mornay Pearson L. That's definitely a mouthful right there. At 8,000 for Houston, we mentioned how that offense is pretty good. Walker is obviously a really good quarterback. Looked really good last week with 4 touchdowns. And Pearson L, I believe, had 4 targets or 5 targets, 4 receptions, 64 yards. Didn't score a touchdown, but I think that in the offense, obviously he can catch a touchdown at any point. And his price tag is pretty decent. He's not one of the super high price guys like the Nelson Spruces of the world. So I think he's definitely kind of in that that sort of next elite tier that you can actually plug him in, get exposure to that game with Houston there. I think that's a good play. And then
he's St. Louis.
Did I say St. Louis? Well, he's
going against Houston.
He's playing against Houston. Yeah, playing against Houston. All right.
Yeah, I misheard you. So it's funny you mentioned him, because I actually like Alonzo Russell better, who's also on St. Louis. Yep. He gets a similar matchup as far as the defense goes, but he's only 4,800. He had 5 targets last week, got 3 for 49 and a touchdown. He was second in targets only by 1, but he's much cheaper than your guy DeMornay. So
good point.
I agree. I think he's a play. But I think that my construction this week is going to be paying up for a couple of the top guys and then trying to find somebody in that mid-range to save some caps. So I mentioned Cam Phillips last week. Obviously, he had a
really
good week,
game.
But a big part of it was the long touchdown. He ended up 9 targets, 4 for 67, but 50 of that came on the long touchdown. I'm still kind of interested to see how Houston kind of shakes out because, they have Sammy Coates, they have Khalil Lewis.
Yep.
Like you said, Nick Hawley gets a lot of pass game work as well. So I want to go back to Cam Phillips at 8,400, but I'm still not convinced that he's going to see the 9 targets that he saw last week and how many of those he can really convert because, for 800 more, it's probably one of my favorite plays on the week, and that's Austin Proehl. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Yep.
He doesn't have as good of a wide receiver cornerback matchup as some of these other guys, but when I watched that game, the one thing I noticed is that anytime Silvers was in trouble, he just looked for where Proehl was on the field and just threw it to him.
Yep.
And whenever a guy has that clear number one kind of check down option, especially in PPR scoring, that's the guy I want. 10 targets, end up having 5 for 88. And, obviously he had the 2 touchdowns, which, is going to make him very popular for box score. But I think more than the box score here was just, like I said, the fact that on every play, if he was the first option, second option, if he was scrambling, it was where's Austin Proehl, throw it in his general direction.
Yep.
So, that little toe tap down the sideline was pretty good. I like that. Showed a little bit of balance and but I think he's somebody, even if he isn't as big and, kind of flashy as some of these other guys, targets are king, right?
Yep.
Especially in PPR scoring. So at 9,200, I think after Nelson Spruce, he's probably one of my favorite guys. So I'm probably going to have a lot of Austin Proehl.
Yep, I love that call. I have Proehl on my list as well. The only other guy that I had that I want to talk about, he's a little bit cheaper down there, and he was actually super cheap last week, and I was put on him sort of after the podcast last week, so I didn't talk about him, was Jordan Smallwood. I believe he was almost min salary last week, maybe 3,200, and of course he had a really good game. He's jumped up in price now. He's 6.9K. He plays for LA going up against Dallas, so he's somebody I want to look at too because he had a pretty good amount of targets. So Smallwood's on my list, and then I was trying to get while you were talking there, looking up Brandon Barnes, who's also for LA at 5.5. I think he's technically a tight end. He was also on my list there, but I was trying to get his what am I trying to say here? His metrics. I thought he was he's 6'4", 255. So he's a big boy and he's pretty athletic. Yeah. So I think that he's sort of that red zone threat there. So Brandon Barnes, he may not get as many targets as some of the other guys get, but he just needs to catch that one touchdown at 5.5, and I think he can pay off his salary for sure.
Yep. One other guy I want to talk about is Daniel Williams. He was my sit call last week. I expected him to be the number one receiver in that Vipers offense, and he was minimum price. Obviously, that worked out.
Yeah.
3 on 9 targets. He got a big price bump, obviously, due to that stat line. 7,600 is his price this week. I'm not as interested, and as we talked about, a big part of that is that Aaron Murray is not playing. Like you said, Flowers is expected to be more of a runner.
Yep.
But the other part of that is also, I think, a lot of it, kind of like I mentioned with Kroll, it's just chemistry. You know, if it was a target, if it was a timing type thing where he just knew where he was going to be on his routes every time, you're not going to have that same chemistry with the backup quarterback.
Yep.
So if I'm going to play any Vipers wide receiver, it's going to be Jalen Tolliver. And that's just because he's so much cheaper. He's basically half price at 3,900. He had 8 targets instead of 9, which is very comparable. He only went 3 for 47, but he played the second most snaps on the team. And importantly, he was targeted as the first receiver on 2 separate end zone drives, right? Deep in, when they're going in to score. So I think at 3,900, Jalen Tolliver ends up being one of my favorite cheap options this week to be able to, get some salary relief to pay up for some of those guys, Spruce, Kroll, Walker, that we've talked about already.
Yeah, good point there. Because actually, when I was looking at some of these guys, I had a hard time finding those cheap guys. I think last week it was tons of them. They were everywhere.
Yeah.
This week it's like, yeah, I mean, DraftKings definitely, got their research in and priced the guys right this week. So it's a lot harder to find that value this week than it was last week.
Yeah, just want to shout out Justin again in the chat. He mentioned Eli Rogers. We were talking about him last week, that we thought there was some gamesmanship with him not being listed at the top of the depth chart. That did end up being the case. He ended up having 6 targets, looked like he was clearly one of the top targets on that team. But at 9,700, again, he gives me a little bit of pause because I don't know that there really is that dominant receiver in that DC offense, right? I think Ross could have the day. Rogers could have the day. I was obviously disappointed in Malachi Dupree, but he got all the snaps. He didn't get the targets, but he got all the snaps, right? So we already talked about DC's commitment to running the ball. I think it's personally going to be more of a Ross week than an Eli Rogers week. But if you're going to do a Cardale stack, I don't have any problem throwing Eli Rogers in there.
Yep, agreed. And I think I was reading, I guess he's probable now, but Malachi Dupree was actually at one point listed as questionable. I guess he's been upgraded to probable now, but his price did come up a little bit, probably based on ownership more than anything, because I think he was pretty highly owned because of his price point and the fact that he was listed as a starter. But yeah, I think he disappointed a little bit, and Eli Rogers kind of stepped up and did pretty well there. So, all right, is anybody else receiver-wise you want to talk about before we move on to the defenses?
No, I think we touched on everybody. All
right, let's go ahead and do the defenses here. You take one defense, and I'll take one of the defenses. Who you got for yours?
Yeah, I had, let's see. I'm going to go with Houston. I had Houston defense last week. They didn't really do as well for me as I hoped. Last week, pretty much, if you didn't have DC defense or New York defense, you probably struggled to cash, unless every other spot you just hit. But Houston is a home favorite again. They also are low priced again. I think that you're looking for salary relief this week. I am a little bit worried. Like I said, the total is expected to go over 50. But as we know on DraftKings, the majority of your defensive scoring is going to come not from points, but from sacks, from turnovers, and from defensive touchdowns. And I think that they could have a real good shot of being able to score here. And so I think that there are really only 2 defenses in play for me, and I think you're taking the other one. So I'm going to go ahead and take Houston for the bargain.
Yeah, I love Houston, and I think the other one that you're talking about is the defenders again. I think that they are the best defense. They caused a lot of turnovers. I believe they had two touchdowns on special teams, though, right? One was a block kick. I didn't get to watch the game, but I know they had 2 defensive touchdowns at some point, either a block kick or interception for a touchdown. But yeah, they were a great defense last week. At one point, they were the highest scoring, player on the slate. I think they eventually gave some points up and ended up kind of slipping down a little bit. But they had I think, close to 30 points there at one point. So definitely love the defenders this week. And there's one other defense I wanted to mention just because they are so cheap. The Dragons, I know they only scored 1 fantasy point last week, so it's not really, they dropped down to dead last. But I don't mind them because they're playing Tampa Bay, who had 3 points last week. So, You never
they
know.
get to open their home opener at CenturyLink Field.
Exactly.
And you know how that place can get pretty loud. I agree.
Yep.
I actually considered them as my sit call. Again, we were looking for salary relief. It's tough to look at that one next to their name and be like, I don't know if I can play them, but they play DC at DC.
Yep.
They're
tough.
playing Tampa Bay without Aaron Murray at home.
Yep.
Like, I'm not saying that they're going to, get anywhere close to the anticipated scoring of the Guardians, but if you can't find that extra $1,000, I think that they could, they're going to probably do better than a lot of people expect. So I like that Dragons call. I think they're definitely the punt if you can't find the other 400 to get up to Houston.
Agreed 100%. All right, man, let's go ahead and just jump into our stacks.
And now, the stacks of the week.
All right, man, go ahead and give me your stack first. I had a hard time getting my stack set up here, so hopefully you got some good ones to talk about.
Yeah, one of the ones that was mentioned in the chat is Jarrell Presley in the DC defense. We've been talking all show about DC's commitment to the run. I had that one listed, so I definitely want to mention that one off top. But I've mentioned that I'm really hyped a little bit about the return of Landry Jones here. So my stack this week, obviously, I'm going to have a lot of exposure to a number of guys here, right? Obviously, Philip Walker's going to be, popular, but I'm going to go Landry Jones, Jeff Badette, and my boy Lance Dunbar. And if you're looking for somebody to bring it back with, we've mentioned a couple of different people for LA, but see if I can pick a favorite here. Go ahead and I'll see if I can figure out who I want to bring it.
It's funny because, we usually do a show sheet ahead of time, so I know who you
Spruce,
got.
that's what I was going to say, Spruce.
Yeah, see, I was just going to say, because I have that exact same stack.
Do you? Nice.
I didn't include Dunbar in there. I just have Landry Jones, Badette, and Spruce. It's a pretty expensive stack, but I think if you put some of those cheap pieces in there, I think you can fit them all. I did want to look for a stack that includes Quentin Flowers. I had a hard time finding something that I really liked. But I do think that Quentin Flowers is in play for some kind of stack because he's so cheap that you can pay up literally almost everywhere else. But I just couldn't find one that I really liked. I'm going to have to look some more and see what I can find there. And then I think I want to get some kind of exposure to that Houston and St. Louis game as well. I think that'll be a good game to get some exposure to as well. I just haven't figured out how I want to do it yet because it is kind of expensive to try to get into that game.
Yep, I agree. I have some exposure there. I mentioned earlier I like Alonzo Russell as a cheap option for St. Louis. So I had Philip Walker, Cam Phillips, and bringing it back with Alonzo Russell. That was one of the stacks that I had to try and include. As you can imagine, most of my stacks this week are usually going to incorporate one of the cheaper guys, right? Yep. So, like, for example, I have Jalen Tolliver, your boy Darius Victor, Alonzo Russell, Lance Dunbar. Those are kind of my main salary savers if I'm not paying down for, like, Houston defense or something like that.
Yep. Love it. All right, man, let's do the sick call.
And now, the sick call of the week.
All right, we set the bar kind of high here for our sick calls because our sick calls were pretty good last week. Your guy especially, your guy leads the league right now in receiving yards because you nailed that one. So go ahead and give me your sick call this week.
Yeah, this one hurts, man, because I don't think there's a lot of value. I mentioned earlier the Dragons were originally going to be my sick call before we talked about them, but I'm going to go with, and I'm going to butcher this guy's name. It's Donald Parham or Parham.
Parham, yep.
Parham. He is the kind of more or less tight end, like we were talking about earlier. He's listed as a wide receiver, but he's really built more as a tight end for the Renegades. He's only 3,200, and he had 6 targets last week. So I think he's somebody that I think actually could see decent volume, and that was obviously without Landry Jones. The Renegades just looked so bad last week, as we've talked about a couple times this show. But they get Jones. They're going to LA. Should be perfect weather. We want to have some guys with a little bit of size, and I think this guy kind of sets up. I think I read he's 6. So, obviously he gives you some opportunity as a big body across the middle. I think he probably could see an end zone target or two, and he's only 3,200. So we talked, there's not much value this week, especially if we're talking about guys that saw any reasonable amount of targets last week. DraftKings did a really good job pricing them up. He's kind of the only guy that stuck out to me as somebody that might have some upside at his current price.
Yeah, so the guy that I have actually was listed as a starter last week and then ended up not playing. And then we talked about Eli Rogers and Ross kind of taking that starting position. But DeAndre Thompkins, it's almost like DeAndre Thompkins, but he's Thompkins. He's 3.6. He came down in price a little bit. I do think he gets the chance to at least show what he has. I looked up his player profile just to see what he was. So he's 5'11", 192. So he's a smaller guy, but he's a sub 4.4 40 guy. So that's a lot of speed on the field there. He doesn't need a whole lot of catch that quick pass. He can take it to the house. So I think he's a 106 spark rating. He's a pretty good athlete. So I think that combine that with some of those guys that have like Ross and Eli Rogers, he just needs one play at that price to really hit. And I think that because he was listed as a starter, obviously he showed out pretty well in practices. So I think they try to give him the ball. They probably got some plays designed for him. So I think he's 3.6. I think that's a pretty good punt there for me.
Yeah, I agree. I was looking at him last week before he was ruled out. He was initially somebody they were really interested in, so I think they're definitely going to mix him in this week. And we know with that offense, man, all you need is one big play, and you can more than pay off that value. So I like that call a lot.
Definitely. All right, man. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we get out of here? Any strategy you want to mention before we get out of here?
No, man. I think that's it. Last week, hopefully, like I said, people made some money. I think I'll probably go a little bit heavier in terms of volume this week because we have a little bit more to go on. I'm still kind of shy on the cash games, but maybe that'll come with time. But, man, I'm excited that we actually had some football. I think the biggest takeaway last week was that it was better than I expected it to be.
Yep.
After watching some of those AAF games, which is just a tragedy of football, and the fans knew it too. That's why that league collapsed.
Yep.
But with the amount of betting volume, I think they said that the DC Defenders almost sold out. The Renegades almost sold out. So there's obviously a lot of hype around XFL this time around, man, which gives me some good, feeling that this league might be able to give us some relief until we get into draft season, which is my favorite time of year. So.
Yep, definitely. I think it was Darren Ravel that tweeted out that the XFL before the kickoff, before any game had even started, they had already outsold ticket-wise the AAF for their entire season before there was even a kick, which is crazy to think about.
I think it was 2 times over too, is what I read.
Yeah, insane. I mean, it was definitely exciting. The game it's not going to be as good as the NFL. It's just not going to happen. I don't think ever going to be close to that because the guys are that good. They'll be in the NFL. But I think a competitive league, it was a lot of fun. I like the exposure you had to the players, and the interviews they had on the sideline, and the whole thing. And is it just me or did it? I was watching on my phone at work, so I didn't get a chance to watch it at home. But I swear they must have like some high contrast, high saturation cameras because it just looks really, really pretty. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but it looked like it was vibrant colors.
I think the NFL actually, and I was going to mention this, and I'm really glad you brought it up. I think the NFL actually might have a real problem because there's going to be some fans that are going to be like, hey, man, I want to hear what the referees are talking about. I want to hear what these coaches are talking about because everybody I was seeing on Twitter and everywhere on social media last week was talking about how awesome being able to hear the play calls coming in, the interviews. I think there was even one guy who was like, he just had a terrible play and he came off the field and the sideline reporter was like, so you just totally fucked up. How do you feel about that? And I just that's what we're here for, man. Like that's awesome. I haven't seen that in any other sport. You knew you were going to get the big hits, right? You knew they were going to try and de-incentivize punting, but I think that I wasn't quite as, I didn't anticipate enjoying it as much as I did, especially some of that sideline stuff. So,
agreed.
Yeah, man. I did like the fact that the broadcast team that they have with Orlovsky and Pat McAfee, I think they did a really good job of breaking down almost like Romo style the plays as they were coming in from the sideline to where you kind of know, okay, here's who he's going to be looking for if that's not there. But yeah, the sideline interviews immediately after the terrible plays was probably one of my favorite things I've seen in recent memory, man. So I'm really looking forward to seeing some more of that this weekend.
All right, man. All right, good stuff. All right, guys, that's a wrap for the show tonight. Good luck this weekend. Hopefully everybody does well in XFL, and hopefully we'll be back at our regular time next week, not so late. As you can see, I'm still wearing my Home Depot. Here, where is it at? My Home Depot shirt right here, representing our sponsor right there, Home Depot. I just got off of work, came straight down here and podcast. So, all right, man.
Podcast has been presented by
Yeah.
Home Depot.
I wish they'd sponsor us, man. I could retire and not have to work anymore if we can get a sponsor like that. All right, Tim, man. Well, I'll be talking to you again. You can follow Tim, obviously, in the DFS Roundtable Facebook group. You can follow me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. Tim, what's your Twitter again? Keto something?
Yeah, Keto DFS. KETO DFS.
All right, good stuff. All right, guys, that's a wrap.